Design-driven leadership and entrepreneurship is his research forte. He works with global organizations to change responses to emerging technologies. Please welcome the Dean, Institute of Design, Chicago, Anijo Mathew.
Can you hear me? Yes? Good morning, everybody. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Great, thank you. So as you heard the robotic voice say, my name is Anijo Mathew, and I'm the Dean of the Institute of Design. I'll start off by talking a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am an architect by training. Here in India, I went to BITS Ranchi or BIT Mesra. After that, I did my design in the US at Harvard. And then for a short period of time, I did some research at the MIT Media Lab, and my PhD is in computing. So in my research, I tried to blend all of these three things: architecture, space, users, and computers. And I also, in addition to helping organizations, especially multinational companies in Asia, build innovation platforms, I have my own startup, or I had my own startup. It was built around tourism and storytelling. So this was a thing that I started in 2014. So in some sense, I know what it feels like to build a company and to take it to a stage where raise money and build a viable ship product. Today I'm going to talk, this is the title of my talk, Future Imperfect, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what are we going to see, what are we seeing around us in a post-design thinking world. In order for me to take you through this journey, I have to introduce you to the Institute of Design. For those of you who don't know the Institute of Design, we are the direct descendants of the Bauhaus in Germany. How many of you know the Bauhaus? Yeah? Okay. So the person on the left is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. He was a Bauhaus master, and he was brought to Chicago by business people in Chicago to build the Bauhaus in the US. And this is during the Industrial Revolution, when people were building products, but they weren't looking as great as the products that were coming out of Europe. And so what happened with the transition over, that Moholy-Nagy built the first American Bauhaus. This was around the same time that Mies van der Rohe was building the architecture school at IIT. But the new Bauhaus was not part of IIT. And then IIT acquires the new Bauhaus in the 1950s. So since many of you may know us as IIT Chicago, we actually predate IIT Chicago, our acquisition by IIT Chicago. The thing on the left is the curriculum wheel that Moholy-Nagy drew as part of his directorship at ID. And this curriculum wheel went on to influence several curricula around the world, including, how many of you know who that person is? Anybody? Charles Eames, and where is he? NID, right? So including NID, even though NID later on adopted several parts of the Ulm curriculum, the Bauhaus curriculum was the first part of this. Today, we are the largest graduate school dedicated only to graduate education in design. That's our new building in Chicago. So now that you have a little bit of history, let me ask you a question. We had this question at the panel yesterday. What is design? And in your mind, most of your minds, this is what good design looks like. Or this is what good design looks like. And when you grow up, you want to be this guy, right? So in some sense, we have been taught ever since we were in design school or we picked up design, that design is a set of intentional actions to solve a problem. Yes? So if you ask someone what is design, they would say this. The problem with this statement is that inherently it sets design up as a gift, something that you give to someone and walk away from. And this is a problem. Because we are giving this gift, not only are we giving this gift, we are also crafting that gift. We are the master of that gift. And it creates an inherent hubris in us. And so Venkatesh Rajamanikam at IIT Bombay said this to me once, and I was like, this is great, right? The very qualities that make us who we are also make us feel that we are very special, that we are somehow different from other people because nobody else can do what we can do. And this, to me, is an incredibly problematic statement, that our unique abilities are somehow makes us different from other people. Instead, I'm going to posit a different definition of design. This is the Nobel laureate Herb Simon, who used to teach at IIT and has written in design journals. This is out of Design Issues. He says, design is a set of intentional actions that moves things from an existing state to a preferred state. This is an incredibly democratic definition. This means my mother is a designer when she changes her living room. Yes? That means I am not special. Now, why am I special? I'm special because I have vocabulary that she does not have. And that is what is different about designers. Now, I'll explain that in a second, but before we go to that, at the Institute of Design, we think of design differently. We think of design as the difference between knowing how to make something and knowing what to make. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, our knowledge of how to make something has gone up. So one of our former deans, Patrick Whitney, went to the CEO of Samsung, and they were chatting, and the CEO said, you know, Patrick, we can make any phone in the world, right? We can beat Apple in technology, yet Apple seems to consistently beat us in the market. And the problem is, Apple knows what to make because they are closer to the user than the factory. This is what we call an innovation gap. And we believe that design is, in some sense, uniquely positioned to reduce this gap. We will never get rid of the gap, but we will be able to reduce it if you use design. So at ID, or the Institute of Design, we like to say design is human-centered systems design. Design can be described as the ability to combine the human-centered aspects of our world and the systems design approaches. So in the 1990s, a group of ID faculty members, ID alums, and students came together with a small design consultancy in Chicago to do a project called, that was for this petrol pump called Amoco. And the design consultancy was IDEO. And this particular mixing led to what we know as design thinking. We don't know who drew this graphic. We don't know who drew this framework. We claim we did. IDEO claims they did. But somewhere in that mix, DVF was born. Now, what is great about IDEO? IDEO took this ability to reduce that gap and gave it a name. They called it design thinking. Yes, we all know this. This is IDEO's greatest contribution to the profession. But I don't think that's IDEO's greatest profession. It's sort of fashionable to bash IDEO now, and a lot of people do. I think IDEO should be revered, because IDEO got us a seat at the table. They changed the way people look at design. No longer were we people that you reached out to when you wanted to get things done. We were the people they would bring in when they wanted to start things. And this is amazing, right? Now, one of the problems that we have is even though we got a seat at the table, we didn't know what to say. I think it's time to move on from design thinking because it's binding us down, it's pulling us down, right? And we need to think bigger than just design thinking. Let me explain what that means. I'm going to call on a personal hero, Richard Buchanan. Has anyone heard of Richard Buchanan? Yes, great. So some folks have. So Richard Buchanan was the head of Carnegie Mellon's School of Design, is now at Case Western in the US. And he argues that there are 4 orders of design. The first order of design is graphic design, where we manipulate signs and symbols and print. The second order of design is industrial design, where we manipulate form. The third order of design is where we manipulate information, interaction. This is where we are right now, the UX realm. Now, all of these realms are essentially creating objects. Now, some of you may have heard this yesterday at the panel, where I got passionate and a little bit excited when I said, I think we have to stop thinking of this idea that we make objects. And we have to think of this idea that we make value. So this is the first expansion I want you to think about. The first expansion I want you to think about is that we are not in the business of making objects. We are in the business of creating value. And that leads us to Buchanan's 4th order of design. Somewhere in between, IDEO crept in and disrupted his 4th order and said, well, there's this middle thing called design thinking. And that's where we manipulate process. And we are able to create process. But now, it's time, and many of you in the consulting field will recognize this when I say this. You're doing this. You're using these things inherently. You're creating the 4th order of design. You just don't know what to call it. The 4th order is systems and organizations. Here, we are moving as a profession from the creation of objects to the creation of systems. And when we do that, we are not in the business of just creating value. We are in the business of designing organizations. Think about that. All of you, when you design the human system that an organization is built around, the processes, the form, the way things move in that organization, when you influence somebody's decision-making ability, you are designing an organization. This is the second expansion I want you to think about. Now, why is this relevant right now? Why is this important for us right now? We are in you notice I haven't said AI yet, right? We are in an incredible time of change. These are statistics that I drew out before I made the presentation. 40% of our workforce will be transformed by AI. 300 million jobs will be changed globally, and yet only 5% of the companies have adopted AI. 30% of work hours will be different in 2030. And 32% of all jobs will be significantly disrupted through AI. This is a time that organizations are going to change. And if you're not in the forefront of designing these organizations, we're going to lose out again. Because we are going to be the people who get thrusted into positions where someone is telling us this is what we want, instead of us telling people that this is what we can do. There is another reason why this is important. Design tends to work for business. And this is one of IDEO's biggest things is that they elevated us. Of course, we've always done it for a long time, but IDEO sort of elevated that value that we have for design. But if you think about the value of the largest company in the world, it's about $1 trillion. And you might affect, Apple touches about 2.2 billion people every year. Now think about what if you were able to touch what we call persistent areas of concern. Civic systems, healthcare systems, food systems, data systems, environmental systems. Think about that. The government of India touches 1.2 billion people every single day and is worth trillions of dollars. What if we were able to do this, the same thing that we do for Apple, for the government of India, or the government of the United States, or all of the governments in the world. All of a sudden, this opens up design to massive implications. And not only are we creating value through a unique generational object, we are creating multi-generational value. If you design a textbook for a school, you design value for one generation of users. But if you redesign the education system of India, you design value for multiple generations of users. Just think about that. And so one of the things that is really important in this fourth order is we need to learn to become leaders. Leadership is the outcome of the fourth order of design. And we have to think of ourselves as leaders who create multi-generational value. And we're calling it a name at ID. We're not 100% sure. It's sort of like human-centered design and design thinking. We're not sure if it's going to stick, but we're calling it design-driven leadership. Not design leadership. Design leadership assumes that you're leading designers. Design-driven leadership means that anybody who is a leader needs to have the vocabulary of design as part of their leadership. And why is this important? Because I believe that the leaders of the future are not going to come from the corridors of business schools and policy schools. They're going to come from the corridors of design schools. And the reason why that's important is because we need to get away from my second passionate plea yesterday, the Andreessen-Horowitz effect. The Andreessen-Horowitz effect is this Silicon Valley idea that you can reduce any complex system into these small component parts that can be entrepreneurially disrupted. Imagine doing that to craft in India. It is impossible to do that to craft in India. It is impossible to do that to rural entrepreneurship or healthcare or climate change. How the hell are we going to disrupt climate change by reducing it to small components of experiences? Because half of the problem is a behavioral design problem that is going to be felt centuries from now. Nobody's going to put money into something where the value comes into a startup that is going to get value centuries from now. So we need a new type of leader. And what are the qualities of this leader? One, we need to step away from this idea that we step into a room and say, I know how to solve this problem. How many of you have leaders like that? I know the answer to this problem. Most leaders, good leaders, should be able to say, I don't know what to do, and have that humility to say, I don't know what to do, but I know how to do it. I know how to assemble a group of people to do it. I know how to find out and frame the problem so that everybody can respond to it. The second thing that we need to do is we need to stop romancing the past and prototype the future. So we say, stop benchmarking the past, prototype the future. And finally, we need to be able to play even if there is incomplete data. Ambiguity is a resource, not a weakness. Now, who believes in all of these three things? We do. Designers do, right? We don't enter into a room saying, I know what the object looks like. We will figure it out. We'll do iterative prototyping. We are always prototyping things of the future. A prototype is an artifact from the future that you bring to today to evaluate. And we love ambiguity. So what does all this mean? For designers, you have to think about something very critical. This is a traditional decision-making loop, not a loop, line. And in this line are parts that designers own and designers don't own. So the first part is sense-making. The second part is choice-making. The third part is decision-making. And the fourth part is optimization. And we have taken, as a community, we have said to ourselves, this is our piece. This is what we do for organizations or for the world, choice making. But if you think about the other parts, the first part is someone has to define what the winning aspiration is. And someone has to figure out where to play. This is the sense-making part. And we are very good at sense-making. Some of us are trained in it, some of us are not, but we are good at sense-making. And we can tell other people how to do sense-making. And the second part is decision-making. How do we win? And how do we create systems that will sustain? This is another thing that we could be part of. Instead of just focusing on the choice-making part, think of focusing on both the sense-making and the decision-making part. What does this mean for design leaders? For those of you in the room who are already leading teams. If you take this spectrum, this line, what we have done is we have relegated most of the components to business leaders. We have agreed that business leaders are better at things like sense-making and decision-making when their training is, anybody who has an MBA here will know the MBA is designed around optimization, right? It's designed around management. It is in the word MBA is administration. And yet we have relegated it out. And I think it's time to bring it back. I think we can, and I'm not saying only designers, I'm saying people who use design as a vocabulary can bring it back. And we can own the first three the parts of this decision-making tree. What does this mean for design educators? And I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again. In the age of the algorithm, humanities will be the differentiator. We need to stop romancing this number-crunching startup ecosystem, that this sort of fast-moving technology thing that everybody is so caught up in. Let's ask more questions. Let's train our students to think more about how do you frame the problem? Who is the human being? What are the systems that are going to be impacted by this? And while a lot of focus is on this part of the education in India and everywhere, is focused on this part of the decision tree, ironically, that is the part that is most likely going to be disrupted by AI. The human being, unlike what other people think, I know there are people here who are doing research to replace the human, I don't think human beings are going to be ever out of the loop. But what's going to happen is there are going to be processes where AI is first and human is second. And there are processes where the human is first and AI is second. And if you think about the part of this decision-making tree or line that is most likely going to be disrupted by AI, it's the choice-making part. We already see it. You can feel it. You might ignore it. You might disagree with it. This is the part that's going to be disrupted. But this part where we are making sense, we are creating the frames, the objects, the problem, the defining the story, the narrative, that is never going to be taken over by AI. At least I don't think. And if we want design to become the vocabulary of leadership, as I said, we need to know what vocabulary means. Traditionally, if you think about, if you break vocabulary down, it can be broken into three parts. Any vocabulary has etymology, syntax, and semantics. And this particular slide comes thanks to a comment that Bala made in one of our pre-presentation meetups. So Shiva made in one of our pre-presentation meetups. And I was very inspired by this. So let's break it down. Etymology, syntax, and semantics. What is etymology? Etymology is the knowledge of where words come from, how things were made, how did they change over time. If you don't know what the Bauhaus is and what it did for the field of design, that's a problem. If you're not taught Gestalt theory in your education system, that's a problem because you don't know where these things came from. Then there's syntax. Syntax are the units, the arrangement of the units to create meaning. Most systems are very good at syntax. And semantics is meaning making. Once you know etymology and syntax, you can combine these things to make new things. This is incredibly difficult if you don't know the etymology and if you don't know the syntax. Semantics is a learned aspiration. Think about this. Picasso knows how to draw a bull. He knows how to draw a real bull, and yet he's able to disrupt it. It's only when you know the craft that can you disrupt the craft. And today, most design schools tend to focus on syntax, while they forget the etymology and the semantics. And this is a problem, because syntax alone will not allow you to make new meaning. How many of you caught the title of the talk? It's a play on future perfect. I ran it through AI, and it said it was a beautiful title, by the way. And what's amazing about the way I'm able to manipulate this is I'm taking something that is connected to the theme of the talk, but is yet a real thing that I've transformed. And this is something that we need to learn how to do. If you don't know how to do this ability to create new objects from existing objects, that's a problem. And so, like I said, we have to stop. Just because you know syntax doesn't mean that you know how to create new meaning. And this is why I said we need to have design systems or education systems that are able to teach people semantics as much as syntax and etymology as much as syntax. So what does this mean for all of us? We are in an incredible time of change. Incredible. It is perhaps the most exciting time in many of our generational lifetimes. Our world is getting transformed as we speak. The last time we saw this type of change was in the 1990s, when many of you were either just born or were just a few years old. And this is when the trifecta of the mobile phone, the computer, and the internet came together. And in the 1990s, for those of you who are old enough to remember that time, what did it lead to? It led to trillion-dollar industries that transformed the way we live. Today, we are seeing a new trifecta form. Yesterday, we saw a lot of conversation about AI, but I was surprised that nobody was talking about XR and robotics. Think about this. The trifecta of AI, XR, and robotics, it's not come together yet. And maybe it's someone in this room who will bring it together. And that's when we get the new trillion-dollar industries. Has anyone ever sat in a Waymo? How many of you know what a Waymo is? How many of you have sat in a Waymo? Isn't it great and freaky and crazy all at the same time? For those of you who don't know what Waymo is, it's Alphabet's self-driving taxi in San Francisco. And it's an incredible experience when you put AI and robotics together. Because this thing is navigating the landscape of San Francisco, the hills and the troughs, in ways that human beings cannot. Human beings are not even capable of seeing as much as these robots can. Just think about what the world that we are going to design into the future, the organizations that we are going to design in the future. So as I finish up my talk, I want you to leave with a few things. One, stop talking about objects. Start talking about value. What are the values that you're bringing to an organization? And as you build this muscle, start thinking about how do those values lead to the design of organizations. And this is where design is moving, whether you like it or not. And if you don't build your muscle in this space, you're going to feel left out in 10 years' time. For those of you who are interested in a little bit of reading and listening, this is a book that I would highly recommend. You will notice the subtitle is something I've been calling out all through this festival, is In the Age of Humanities, in the Age of Algorithm, Humanities Will Be the Differentiator. This is where I'm getting that subtitle from. If you're interested in expanding your ideas of what design is, listen to podcasts, and you don't like reading books. Somebody here yesterday said, about books. If you're interested in expanding your horizon, listen to podcasts. 99% Invisible is a great podcast. We have a podcast at the Institute of Design called With Intent. This year's season is produced by Albert Shum, who was a former CVP of design at Microsoft, and Tamer Abanami, who worked with Albert at Microsoft. And they're looking at how objects over time have evolved, and they're starting to create new value. And I'm going to end with a little plug for the Institute of Design. For those of you who are interested, this is my sort of pitch. Our programs are built for leadership. We are one of the few schools in the world that has a dual master's and MDes MBA combo that allows you to get 2 degrees in 2 years. And we have programs that are built for working professionals. In 2025, in 2024 and 2025, we are having a global series which looks at responsible AI. It's called Shapeshift. And as we are speaking, these things are happening around the world. So we started in Auckland. Today is Tokyo. This next week is Pune. Then we move to New York. And then we all meet up in Chicago. And each place, we are taking AI and moving it into the space of complex, persistent areas of concern. Not the technology. We're not interested in how to buy NVIDIA chips and code with GPUs. What we are saying is, what will AI impact? So in Pune, it is about skill development and social impact. In Tokyo, it's about mental health and well-being. In Auckland, it was about democracy and culture. And in New York, we're going to talk about the future of media. And just to give you a sense of what these panels look like, the New York one is the head of design for New York Times, head of content for Yahoo News, and one of the design leaders from Microsoft talking about the future of media. And everybody comes to Chicago in May 2025, and where we'll bring together leaders from around the world. So I invite you to come to Chicago in May and to visit us at ID and be part of this sort of conversation. I'm going to end by showing you what ID looks like, and thank you. Katya, we have 7 minutes left, so I don't know if you want to take questions now.
Oh, questions. We have a little bit of time for questions.
Hey, Rasagya here. Love the conversation. I think a lot of points that you're talking about are things that a lot of us are thinking about, but yet have not been able to figure out how to bring it in our practice. I also know that this room is filled with a lot of people who are still in the middle of their IC career, right? They're still in the focus of making objects. And a lot of our organizational constraints prevent us from even thinking about the things that you're talking about. So a question that I had for you was, do you have some advice on how some of us who probably have organizational context that we are in, to move towards these ideas? Do we read but then not find ways to implement it at work? Do we bring our business leaders to come to your talks and hopefully they pick up what needs to happen and they maybe move towards design-driven leadership while we continue to support them? Or are there aspects that you think individual contributors could start doing today so that they are able to do some of these things in the coming future years, right? So are there side projects? Are there side opportunities? Or are there more sort of tactical things that you have that we should do today at work to
Oh,
move
a lot of
towards
questions. A lot of questions in that question.
Well, clearly you've been thinking a lot about this, so you know you've said a few things that I would have said. I think the first thing that designers need to do is when you're put on this trajectory to make something, and making is not bad, right? That's our core skill, that's our craft, and I think I'm not suggesting we should lose that. I think we should ask the question, who is this for? What value are they getting? What is the final thing going to not look like, but impact? How is the final thing going to impact somebody's life? So that reframe is the first thing we need to do in our organization. So even a junior designer can do that reframe. So even if you're a junior designer in an organization, you can start by asking those questions. Like not, hey, what does this wireframe look like? Or what's the Figma output? But what does that wireframe eventually do to the user? So that's the first thing that we need to do. The second thing that we need to do is we need to bring our next level managers and talk to them about this, right? Like, hey, have you heard about things like design-driven leadership? Or even some of them may not even know about design thinking, right? Like, so this idea of having a conversation about human-centered design, strategic design, systems design, and things like that. So that's the next level. The third level is, I think, designers of a certain caliber in an organization can host meetups or organizational conclaves that bring these thoughts into the organization and invite some senior leaders to these conversations because they might not even understand this. They might not understand. We were just talking yesterday about a group of people who had never touched the design process, being introduced to the design process, and they were like, whoa, we didn't know that we could even do these things, right? And the fourth thing is, I think if you're really frustrated in an organization and it's not really working for you, maybe start a small side gig. Some of the best consultancies in the world started when people were let go from their companies. And I think you need to think about that, right? Like, are there things that we can do right now that will transform the ecosystem by working outside? It could be a side project. It could be if you're... And I don't live in this illusion that money is not important. For me, it is, and I know it's for you too. So I don't want you to leave your job and start a consultancy, but you can start on the side, right? Like you can start doing things on the side. And I think the last thing is to have conferences like this. So I really credit the organizers for bringing together these. It's not a conference that is only about cerebral things. It's also about craft. Yesterday we saw Suresh and Nikon's work. That's amazing, right? Like this is the DNA of our community. And we are seeing people like Suresh and Nikon push the edge of craft. And some of us may live in that universe where we are pushing the edge of craft. And some of us live in the other side. But we can't be talking to ourselves. We need to invite senior leaders from companies to come to these conversations, not CDOs alone. And CDOs are great because you get to see that leadership angle, but maybe CEOs, and maybe COOs, and maybe CTOs, people who traditionally haven't had design in their vocabulary. Katya,
Fantastic. There was a question at the back. Up, stand. We only have time for one more. I do see your hand, but you're going to have to catch Anijo in the break over there.
Thanks. Fantastic session. Many
you.
questions come to my mind. I'll just pick two. My name is Madan. I like that slide where you said leaders should say, I don't know, but we can find out what to do. So I think one aspect where design can make a big contribution is conversational design. How to design those very difficult conversations that organizations must have. And that leads to the second question, which is...
No. One question, my friend. We have 1 minute left.
Done. Thanks.
Oh, Katya stuff. This is really interesting because if you talk to senior leaders in organizations, they are burdened. Some of them are inherently, I know the answer, I'm going to solve this problem. Some of them are like, I feel like I have to say I know the answer because otherwise I'll be seen as stupid, right? I'll be seen as not a leader. And because this is how they're trained in business schools and policy schools and law schools, right? I know the answer. And I think if you start with this sort of idea of a conversation with the leader and sort of soften that I know thing into, do you really know? Do you know who your users are? Do you know what they're thinking? You think your family has been in the business of making pressure cookers for centuries or generations. Do people really still need pressure cookers, or have they moved on, right? So having that conversation of, I don't know, is an equally acceptable response to a problem is something that we have to inculcate. Because otherwise, as a leader standing in front of here, you're all expecting me to know the answer. Honestly, guys, I have no idea. Right? I have a sense of what this looks like, and I'm able to transfer that to you. But beyond that, I don't know if any of the things I said will come true. That's how leadership is, right? We just have to acknowledge this, that we have to have the humility to say that sometimes I just don't know. But I know, I am confident in my ability to pull together a group of people to frame that problem and to understand this solution. I think that conversation has to happen.
That is fantastic.
Thank you,
so
Katya.
much
Thank you,
for
everybody.
that. Round of applause for Anijo.